Well, another big warm welcome to our beloved friend, colleague, and advisory board member of our Human Ecology Project, Colin Campbell. Is one of the most humble human beings that Bill and I know and adore. I know Colin is so well known around the world, but it's always nice just to quickly remind ourselves that the dedication of his life to the science of human health for more than 60 years has been his primary focus. So that, along with the association between diet and disease, particularly cancer, although largely known for the China study, and we all know it's been the most comprehensive studies of health and nutrition ever conducted, and was recognized by the New York Times as the Grand Prix of epidemiology. I so love that one line. Now, Dr. Campbell's profound impact also includes extensive involvement in education, public policy, and laboratory research. So Bill and I are, of course, always thrilled to connect and, just catch up, basically, with what Colin's up to. So, Bill, you have a great question there to kick off why we need to share this incredible human again with as many people around the world as we can and keep pushing the rock up the hill.
Well, pretty fundamental. Good morning, Colin.
Good morning.
I think that many of us, perhaps naively, thought that after the China study came out, we would see some kind of change in nutritional policy in medicine. And that doesn't really appear to happen. What do you think? What's your opinion on that?
You really did ask the most seminal question, I think, of all time. I get very excited, of course, about how to interpret the food we eat as to its effects. I kind of got into this space in this area almost incidentally, at least. And I had no visions when I was young of doing this kind of thing. But so it was thanks to a lot of elders I had, first and foremost, my dad, and then some professors and stuff like that. So it ended up in the field. And one thing led to another. And when I first got involved in the field, it was exactly opposite of what I now believe. I grew up on a farm and milking cows, and I was a hunter and a fisherman and all that stuff. I was a farm boy, 100%. And so my formal education in graduate school was to do research on promoting the consumption of more animal protein. That was perfect. I mean, what the heck? That's who I was. And then I learned some stuff. And so in any case, now I'm at a point in time when there's been all these years from so many different perspectives and working with so many colleagues and students and things like that. I've come to have pretty firm ideas. Maybe some might think they're a bit arrogant. I don't know, but in any case, they work. So I think the difficulty of conveying this information requires a whole new sort of perspective, almost on society as a whole, not just in medicine or health. It really has to do with the statement, one of my favorite statements of all time, was that of Aristotle in Greece many years ago. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like a pretty simple concept, maybe, I don't know, but in the science, it means so much. Because once we get into trying to understand how does A cause B, when you give A to the body, if you will, what I found out is not one thing that it operates. It doesn't act in a one-track way. It just explodes in the kind of effects it has. That concept has been difficult to sell because we've all been sort of trained to listen, if you will, on the idea that we want to know something about causes and effects, and we know something about diseases, this and that. And so we're always looking for some simple solution, as if it's acting all by itself. And that's what the human brain, I guess, is trained to do. At least that's the way we tend to believe. When in reality, this concept, best illustrated by the food we eat, is it just almost explodes into infinite numbers of parts. We call a lot of them nutrients, but they all work together. And it sort of begs the question of who's pulling the strings here? Who's keeping all this orchestra in order? And I just found that concept just to be extraordinary, because then, I don't think about it just necessarily just in terms of the biochemistry and the physiology and so forth and so on as it relates to health, but that concept is so old. It's a philosophical concept that applies to so many things. And that then in turn begs the question, why do we go down this track instead of that track? Why do we believe this, that kind of that? And I can understand. I mean, I understand it. That's who we are. I'm no different. We always thought that way too. But trying to convey that concept, to answer your question, convey that concept to a group of people who, like me and everybody else, we don't tend to think that way very much. We think the best of science is, let's identify what is A? What's the structure and what is this chemical that does that? What's the structure and how does it go through the body and how does it cause this and that? I mean, that's what I taught for a number of years. So I think I know what I'm talking about, because I was doing the same thing and trying to do it in a very formal way. But just selling that idea of holism is probably one of the toughest things to do, because talking about one thing at a time, but also there's one other thing that pulls it along, that kind of thinking. It makes money. It makes money. It's the basis for, our being able to do some specific things and then earn some money for it. I'm not sorry for that long answer, but
no, that's great. I wonder, do you think that the financial influence, which is obviously a huge one, that we all know, is the real reason, or do you think that there's the reason because of medical dogma gets in the way, or is it just hubris?
There's some of both. Yeah, for sure, the hubris part of it, which goes back to the ancient Egypt civilization from my learning. But in any case, the financial part of it is also clear, and it applies to the medical system, because the medical system, I have to say, first and foremost, is the way they're trained. It's meant to be a business. If they can't make money doing what they're doing, what's the point? And so it's very hard to recognize people doing something for nothing. And so unfortunately, we do try to do things in the medical system one at a time. They even call it the best of science, because it's very specific. And my point, I just was talking about a moment ago, it's not just one thing working all by itself. It all works together. That doesn't sell. One thing, if we can identify in food, for example, one thing in food, one of the nutrients, if you will, that actually can maybe, so according to a hypothesis, maybe, let's say, treat heart disease, just for example. Well, then if we want to do that, and we want to make some money on it, that compound that we're going to make sure it does that, we have to get intellectual property protection, like a patent or a trademark or something like that, so that if we go into business, we're going to protect our business going forward, and we're going to stick to that idea. So we end up making statins. We found out, in the system, all about this complex biochemistry. We found a reaction that's in that pathway to let's say increase cholesterol. We make cholesterol, and that was said to be incorrectly, I might add. That was said to be the cause of cancer, when it's not. It's an incidental sort of stuff that sort of sits in a vessel when things get going. But in any case, we found the exact reaction best. The key reaction, key we call a rate limiting reaction. In a sequence of reaction, we found that enzyme, and they made a chemical. It's called statins. Yeah. And so statins exploded You can look at all the dollars and cents that's been made for that. And then on top of it, it's a pretty good business. Let's face it. Then it pushes
Yeah,
it pushes
it's a very big business.
Yeah. And there it is. And so once it gets a business that big, then like any other kind of business, they don't want to lose that. And so they end up telling all these, they kind of stretch the truth.
Yeah.
That's what they do. They stretch the truth of what it can do. So over the years, now we can see after that was in the middle 80s, late 80s when that first was introduced. Now we can see, and I've done this, and I've had other people send me stuff too. If you look at the data on how much effect does statins really have, it's not much. Mm-hmm. And I was on a panel once, and I said that, and the guy sat next to me with the president of the American Cardiology Society, nice guy. And he brought along some papers. I think he thought I was going to say that anyhow, but he said, no, look here. He said it to me quietly on the table in front of the audience. So, he was very defensive, as, it's his right. I mean,
yeah.
At the end of the day, we should be arguing about the facts. But I kind of stuck to my guns. I said, no, I don't. At the best that I could find was that statins supposedly in one study showed reduced heart attack, reduced heart disease by 9%, which is a stretch, by the way. They don't even talk about it. They act like it's 20, 30, 40, 50%. It's nowhere near that. And the more I got into it, I realized it's only just an occasional study will show something kind of silly like that. And so that's, yeah.
So does that
sorry, Bill. I have a question. So, in Colin's expert opinion, what will it take for medicine to ever embrace the nutritional approach to disease? What will it take?
Boy, that is the question, Marlene. It is the question, and I'm writing a new book on this right now. I've had some thoughts about it, especially being in policy development as I have been. And I like to say, I think this in theory, that one of the best ways to do that, other than changing the economy, I guess, one way to do it is to make sure we tell the truth to the public. Yeah. I think that's a pretty respectable idea. For those responsible for organizing public information, for crying out loud, mm-hmm. Their job is supposed to be telling the public the truth, but they don't. I can tell you verse and chapter on that. I've seen it. A lot of good people just doing what they, I guess, are expected to do. That's the system. And so you kind of support the system the way it is. And you support, for example, the use of drugs like statins and stuff like that. That's where the money is. And define the organization to tell the truth. I'd say two things. There's two things come to mind. First off, the industry who's selling stuff is not necessarily going to really tell the truth, let's face it. The policy community who, is setting up policy to try to frame the information in a way it can be understood, et cetera, and then help those parts of it. The policy community, at least I'll speak for the United States, but I think it's true for the UK and elsewhere, that policy community, usually run by government forces, structure, if you will, that becomes the handle for industry. This is especially true in the United States. Industry, the private sector has so much control over our government, whether it's on the right or the left. That's just simply a fact. And they in turn then have something to say about who's going to be the new Secretary of Agriculture, the new secretary, whatever like that, or the politician won't get elected. They kind of have to follow the rules. And so it's a system that has gotten really out of hand. It's set in concrete. And, so I say to policy people, I have some occasions to speak that kind of language. I get in a lot of trouble. But in any case, that's what it has to be. That you got to tell the public is one of the reasons I wrote the China study was because I had been in this business for a long time before the Chinese study was written, and getting a lot of pushback and pretty nasty, I must tell you, really nasty. I got away with it because I had tenure in the university and I had academic freedom. Now gone, and that stuff is gone. I got it early in life. So they couldn't touch me. They tried to throw me out of the university. They organized a very formal effort to throw me out of my society. There was a hearing in Washington, all kinds of stuff like that. And so I saw this power up in the naked power. And I've seen how how that money sort of supports that idea. But Bill, you just asked exactly the right question. Can you tell me how that would work? I don't. I think there are groups in the formally there are groups in the government and of course private sector too, professional societies. They've got to attend to the public, but they end up only attending to their supporters or their funders.
Right.
And so when I was complaining about this one because you probably heard this story before, but my wife Karen told me, she says, "Why don't you just stop talking that way? Just go out and write a book for the public. Let them know." So that's how the China study was born, and I didn't think it would go anyplace, but it has been translated to 50 foreign languages and more, but whatever.
Well, and I think I think the influence has been incredible, actually. But and I can understand more the lack of response from the medical profession, but the lack of response from the nutritionists, that baffles me even more.
That is a good question. That's my area, my profession, if you will, and I can see that from the inside. What we end up doing, all of us, whatever sector or segment of the society we're in, more or less, we still come back to this thing about wanting to look at one thing at a time. That's the best of science, they say. And then we refine that and study it in great detail down to its molecular features and chemical structures and all that sort of stuff. Somehow we've gotten in our heads that it's a way of thinking. I guess that probably existed way back in the time of the Greeks and the Egyptians and so forth. And that's why Aristotle said what he said. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's something with the way we think. And most people, they don't have the breadth of knowledge, maybe, of course, that they should have, let's say, but they don't, let's face it, they don't. And so they focus on their favorite item and try to frame it way. I don't know, it's just a way of thinking, reductionism, we call it, as you know.
Yeah. And I wonder too if they, right from the early days in nutritional science, there was so much focus on deficiency diseases that I wonder whether there is just not an inbuilt prejudice to always looking for what's missing rather than what's there.
Yes, you're talking about some of us in nutrition like to talk about the heyday of nutritional science. I don't consider this is back started in the teens and 20s, 19 teens and 1920s, on into the 30s. It was when you said it exactly right. They got around to looking for single things, to count for single things, if you will. Finally, they found something. Oh, this is important for life. It's vital. Well, let's call it a vitamin. That's where it came from. It was in Maine, they called it a vitamin, and so forth. And so that was done in the 19 teens. And then during the 20s, especially, and on to the 30s too, there were a lot of scientists in the nutrition community. I understand why they thought it was a heyday of nutrition, because that was putting nutrition all of a sudden as a discipline kind of pretty high up, was discovering things like that. Vitamins, and the word technically means that a vitamin must be consumed or we're going to suffer. And so they set some minimum amounts that need to be consumed. And so it went. finally, for a while there, they, like even with vitamin A, vitamin A is not really the vitamin, by the way. The definition of a vitamin is something we need to consume in that form. We don't need to consume vitamin A, which we refer to as vitamin A, because vitamin A is the retinoid, is the product that our bodies make from consuming carotene and a whole lot of other carotenoids too. So in any case, we got that one wrong, but the word vitamin just crept in our language, and it was fun and exciting, I guess, with those people at that time to discover something that's going to keep us alive, and make us and yeah, then we get all these different vitamins. The last vitamin formally, this is the way the narrative goes. The last vitamin discovered was in 1948, was called vitamin B12.
Yeah.
Then after that, there was a B13 and B14. They didn't go too far, but they kept on with that idea. Now the best thing we can make is vaccines.
Yeah.
So that's another whole new world.
Yeah.
And
right. Indeed.
Colin, I have a question. Sorry, Bill. Sorry, just while it's in my mind, because if you think about it, since the revolutionary launch of the China study, right, 2005, Colin, what other research has happened since your groundbreaking book? What further research is there?
Gosh, I don't know what's happened that really could. I mean, I get some ideas. The China study, after it came out and started thinking about it more, I really got kind of excited about this idea of holism, published a book on it. I think that I didn't have that fully in my mind at the time I wrote it. So the concept of thinking that way is pretty astounding, actually, I think, because a lot of stuff comes out of that. One of the things, again, referring to my own stuff, I shouldn't be doing that, but do what it does. I learned that early on, and this is experimental animal studies, which a lot of people just think is horrific, but anyhow, that's what we had to work with in those days. The idea that in a disease like cancer, it starts with a gene, it is therefore genetic, and the popular notion is you get cancer if it runs in the family. You're more likely, that's the story. Genes. Well, what we did early on, it really caught my eye. It was dramatic. It was very fast. A nutrient could control what the genes did. It could control whether or not the genes got expressed. I mean, for me, having seen that at the time, and specifically talking about the ability of animal protein, of all things, to actually turn on, a mutagenic gene, a gene that's been mutated, if you will, to turn that gene on to start creating a whole series of reactions that led to cancer. And then we can turn it off. We can turn it on, turn it off. I mean, that to me was so fundamental, really, to my whole concept of what is nutrition.
Yeah.
So that it's not, cancer is not a genetic disease. Like, that's the only, if you look on the website of the National Cancer Society for some years, they stopped it. I think they did because of what I said.
Yeah.
Because I've been part of them. But there was the very first sentence. Make no mistake about it. Cancer is a genetic disease.
Wow.
And I said, BS. That's not true. And they were saying that in the 80s, 90s. And, the work that I did initially, I know a lot of people knew about it at the time, but they would not repeat it. They would not, but they had, and I'm sure this has happened. Karen and I have talked about this too, and others. They were so upset about my stuff. I know it for a fact. They have tried to do the reverse, and they've never been able to do it, and so they had to leave it there. So they ignored it, kind of thing. So nutrition control genes, that's a big one. Also, the fact that not one nutrient works all by itself to cause some big problem. They'll work together. That's another big one, I think. Um, and they're kind of concepts, but then you guys know this here, the way that the various groups have worked, the dimensions of nutrition are so broad. It involves us personally, and now look what it does. The United States, the cost of health care is way out of control because we don't eat right. And then you've got the environment problem. Yeah. So on and on.
But you hit the nail on the head earlier, and that is that if there's, it really seems, even though I hate to believe it, and I know that you do too, but I hate to believe the fact that people would pass up opportunities to diminish illness just because there's no money in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a black mark against us humans, I guess, the way we operate. But
yeah, it really is.
And in the area of nutrition, I'm sorry, I didn't finish that. The answer you asked him about nutrition. I'm in nutrition. I feel a little defensive about the science, I guess. But you know, the nutrition has never been taught in medical schools. Mm-hmm. Not a medical school in the United States to teach nutrition because they are fixated. When I started thinking about this and realizing this, and I spoke to medical schools all over the country, it became clear they didn't have any interest in what I was talking about when it came to nutrition because I would talk about this and this and this and working this way and that. No. It kind of spoiled their game because there's one thing. This is what it does. Don't forget that. Kind of attitude. And so,
see, this is what gets you in trouble.
It gets me in trouble. Yeah.
Colin, they love you. The world loves you. Everyone loves you the world over because you're always in trouble, And I mean, when you tell the truth, you're always in trouble. So when you're not being talked about, then your life is not really worth living. So you're always in trouble, and that's fantastic because you're one of the most incredible souls on the planet right now. In the last 100 years, the most important person in science as far as millions and billions of people around the world believe. I mean, Bill and I talk like you do, why the government agencies are not pressing for a reduction in animal protein. And, we sometimes think, has the increase in veganism improved the way that people are thinking about food? What do you think about that, Colin?
Yeah, the getting the trouble kind of thing, by the way, I'd like to comment on that. There's some things happen that I didn't know what I was doing. Let's face it that way. I've just kind of stumbled into it. And I did get into the position I got, but not too long ago, a few years, 3 or 4 years ago, I was with a group that included a lawyer from Columbia University. He had been a professor of law at Columbia University, and he kind of liked what I do and so forth and so on. And he wanted me to go out to lunch with him and talk about it a bit. He wanted to find out, as lawyers do, I guess, what makes a person think the way they do, because they always have to think about, changing people's attitudes. So he says, why did you do what you did? How do you account for that? And so I was trying to tell him some technical things. My dad only had 2 years of education, et cetera, and I was fortunate to coming from a simple life. And I said something about just being naive, and he said, "That's it." Mm-hmm. He said, "You were so naive." And so, I guess I took it as a compliment because it's true that I didn't know any of this fancy stuff. I didn't grow up on the farm, imagining this or even getting into science or anything. It was just I had the opportunity presented to me, not through my efforts. It was through so many other people, especially my dad. He, with just the 2 years of elementary school education, I had to drive just over 100 miles a day for 5 years to go to high school. Wow. Because he really went out of his way and did everything he could. And he always told me, and of course my brothers and sisters as well, he said, just remember one thing: tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Don't ever forget that. So that's all. and then being naive on top of it.
That's a double curse.
That's right. Then you stumbled into this area. But
you know, we always say there's three things you can't hide, right? The sun, the moon, and the truth. We should say four things: the sun, the moon, and the truth, and Colin Campbell. But you are the truth, right?
Whatever. But it's been fun. I have to say, because if I had academic freedom, which is now, that's another big story has been taken away from us.
Yeah.
Now the majority of people in academia who are supposed to be the ones being the skeptics, asking the questions and so forth, you know, the young people, I hate this, even imagine this. Young people coming in, my own son, who wrote the book with me, he's now run into the same situation. He's on a university faculty, and he's finding out in space. They don't have academic freedom now. So you if you don't say the right thing, well, come on, well turn your 5 years are up, or your 1 year is up, or whatever. And I just, it's so irritating.
It's a real danger, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really now. I don't think you guys in England, maybe, I don't know, don't know that, but here in the United States, on this whole question concerning the pandemic, for example, you know, it made a huge deal, as you all know.
Yeah.
And the way they talk about it and everything else, I was in the pharmacology area myself, primarily for about 15 years. And so I know the concept. And so, as I said before, the concept is reductionism, really. We're looking at one thing to do one thing and so forth and so on. And that is so filtered into the minds of everyone because it's a pretty good medical model. I mean, a pretty good marketing model.
Yeah.
And forget where I was going with this idea, but to be able to speak against that or to challenge that, we've got to have the freedom to speak. And I was granted that as an associate professor at the time, way back in 1969 to be exact. I was quite young, I should get it at the time. And so I've had it all my life and you can't take it away. And so I know that's the wind at my back, because if I didn't have academic freedom, I would have never written the China study.
Wow. And
I would never have done any of the things I've done because I didn't have that freedom to say what I want to say. You know, and it's been one of the greatest losses, I think, to our society. So now in this country, I'm sure our conversation on all kinds of things, or it's just not just science, but our conversation is so polarized.
Yeah.
And everybody is sort of, they're tethered to some particular point of view or community that, you know, they speak that language all like a bunch of sheep.
Right.
So we don't, and if you say something different, lo and behold, you might get shot. You know,
well, it puts a brake on any kind of forward momentum for developing new ideas or even old ideas, developing old ideas, you know, that are tried and true, because it's not always the new ideas that are the best ideas.
You know, that's why the macrobiotic, you know what really caught me on the macrobiotic diet idea was a special mission, of course, you get to know him, and you obviously were right there. You were the one behind him, I guess. Because the whole idea at that point in time, because it was, from my perspective, a little bit strange, you know, be talking about that, but nonetheless, here it came out and it was in the making press. So Michio, one thing led to another. You guys were breaking some ground. You were breaking some ground in the professional community, which was delightful. And so I just thought that was really great. That was a step in the right direction for our society in a larger context.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
We're not stuck to the model that we're supposed to be saying. And so, yeah.
In fact, I think
it's going to be important to.
Bill's
sorry.
on macrobiotics and human behavior. When did you write that? 1978, I think.
1979. Yeah.
Yeah, that was Bill's first book, Macrobiotics and Human Behavior. And like your work, Colin, the same, it never changes because the truth is the truth. You can't change what's real, right? So, yeah, incredible, incredible. Well, sorry, Bill.
Since we've got you here, I'm going to ask you a question that's been burning question for me for a long time. And I wanted to ask somebody who knows as much about nutrition as you do. And it's a little bit of a paradox. And it has to do with vitamin B12. So my understanding is that vitamin B12 is made within the digestive system, but that the receptors for B12 are upstream from it. Is that correct?
Sort of, but I can't tell you the details. Either I don't know them or we don't know them. I'm not sure. But B12, as you know, that story broke in favor of talking about B12 as a result of an article that was written by a guy named Victor Herbert. You may know his name. It was published in the sort of the lead public medical journal today. What the heck was that name? I forgot. But he had a chapter in there, and so he was using that to argue that it only comes from animal food.
Right.
So his interest was, as you may know, was actually in a larger context was promoting animal food.
Right.
So, you know, that I was on the wrong track, and he was defending the proposition, but we need to eat animal food because we need B12 because there's not any place else. But the fact of the matter, B12, this is some Swiss researcher whom I don't know, but I looked at his research, who actually did some formal work with this, some research at the time. There is B12-like activity in plants.
Right.
And so it's not that B12 is only found in animal foods, for starters. There is some of that kind of activity in plants. And at this point in time, I don't know myself, you know, whether those analogs of B12, if you can call them that, you know, how much do they play in this game? So you go back to not sure what that story is. You go back to looking at where did the narrative come from about B12 being so important, because it was actually used, as I say, by Victor Herbert and others to actually push back against the vegan vegetarian communities. That's what it was. It was a handle they could hang their hat on and say, "Oh, you know, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Animals, they got this here vitamin. They're called vitamin." Well,
the same analog issue came up around some of the Japanese fermented foods like tempeh and miso and foods like that supposedly had B12 analog in them. And to my knowledge, no one's ever done any real research on whether those analogs behave the same way in the body as the B12. They may be different chemically, but what's their function? Do they have any function?
Yeah, that's exactly the right question to ask, because when something like this becomes a bit controversial and a bit different, the next step to take is to get in there and start doing some research to see if these claims are true or not true. And you're right. A lot of nutrients, they have analogs, and so the idea is to see which is doing what. Usually, we end up with in our everyday conversation talking about just one of those analogs. The first one was discovered, and maybe the most prominent. But you know, nature doesn't quite work that way. If there's B12 like activity in plants, and what is it doing there? You know, that's kind of crazy. So you asked the right question. I don't know if anyone's even bothered to look at that kind of thing. They've gone down.
I've never found anything.
No,
I've never found anything. And the other part of that is that if the receptors, if they know that there are receptors upstream from where it's constructed in the body, like think in the cecum, nature doesn't make those kind of mistakes usually.
Yeah, it's had a few million years to work on it.
Right. It's been a lot of time to develop that one.
That's right. There must be some failure. That's right. That's exactly the kind of thinking that I like to do too.
Yeah.
The bottom of it. So I think this, I should tell you that Victor Herbert, that guy that was so much
Yeah.
responsible for this, he worked with a guy, but Tom Jukes. I don't know if you heard of her. You ever heard Tom's Jukes?
Yeah, I have, and they're both naysayers.
Yes, that's right. Well, Jukes and Herbert, they worked together, and they both really went after me big time. I must tell you. But Herbert, I was chairman of a committee myself on one occasion that was set up by FDA, and he was on it before I really knew that much about him at the time. Just to have one of him because our committee was responsible for helping FDA determine, what kind of regulations should be imposed, on vitamins, for example. It wasn't much use, but we got to know each other, and but he was talking about naysayer. That's a very weak word. Actually, he's worse than that. he, he was a he was an activist of the first kind, and he detested, the stuff. Eventually, then his real self came out, and then Jukes' real self came out, and then Jukes, the chairman, Herbert, the vice chairman, they were on the committee that you probably heard me talk about in the early 1980s to organize this new thing called the informal is called the Supreme Court of Nutrition Information in our society. And so the committee was put together with 18 people. You probably heard this, I don't want to say. But anyhow, there's 18 people. It was with our Federation of Biological Sciences altogether, FASB, we call it, Federation. You probably know that. Anyhow, they were going to spend some time and build this Supreme Court of Nutrition Information. He had another sort of technical name for it, but that's really what it was. And so the administrator of the whole federation, the year I was on sabbatical, he asked me if I would sit on that committee ad hoc. I didn't know why, because I didn't know him that well. He knew me, I guess, because I was sabbatical in Washington, and he would ask me if I'd sit on that committee ad hoc. And so I said, yeah, because I thought to myself, what they were going to do is try to resolve all the conflict and confusion in nutrition. And I thought, well, it's a decent topic to talk about. So I sit on the committee for that during that year, though they were sort of working out details and stuff like that. And I learned straight off that the news release is going to be released in our first meeting prepared by Jukes and Herbert. I still got a copy of that. And I got it on a slide, actually. Very, very short news release. And they were talking about, we really need this here. They gave some examples, Laetrile and stuff like that. It was pretty controversial at the time. And they talked about this new committee at the National Academy of Science called Diet, Nutrition, Cancer. And they thought that committee was up to mischief. They didn't like that committee. And I was sitting next to the guy sitting next to me who knew me well. He had written reference from MIT, but I said to him, I said, look at this here. What's this here? And right away, I was expressing some doubt about that. Why are they complaining about this National Academy of Science Committee, Diet, Nutrition, Cancer? And he spoke up real quick and he said to the Jukes, as the chair, and Herbert, he says, hey, we better hold off. Let's hold off this conversation. There are some people who actually believe in this, referring to me. I knew he did not. I thought to myself, why is he saying that? He knows who I am.
Yeah.
And so it went on for a year, and they worked at it, and we're all set after a year's worth of work. And they came back to the headquarters the next meeting of the whole federation. This is going to be a national committee, become a government agency, the whole 9 yards, to define nutrition in their way. That's right. What I said, handwriting on the wall. I wasn't part of the conversation during that year because I'm just ad hoc. I didn't have it voting. So in the last meeting, when it was all set up, we're going to come out with a grand statement. Associated Press guy who was outside, everything making big news out of this. And they asked for votes. Everybody in favor? 18 hands are up.
Wow.
But at that point, I felt I had a chance to speak, to say something, because I wasn't allowed. I said, just a minute. If you don't mind, I'm not voting. That's not what I think this committee has not distinguished itself in the past year. I'm really troubled by it. And so Herbert, Drew's friend, he jumps up the big long table, one of those big boardrooms. He jumps up and runs around the end of the table. I come back and grabbed a hold of the armchair and just shook it. He says, "Would you step outside?" I said, "No, I won't step outside. I told you what I think." And so, and just at that time, the Associated Press reporter knocked on the door to come and pick up the news release that was going to be put up. To say they were pissed, I shouldn't say that. They say they're upset is an understatement. It was right after that, then they decided to hold a formal meeting in Washington to have me thrown out of my society.
Wow.
Because that was the most important thing and if that had gone into effect, we'd been living with that today. Probably as an agency of the government, really totally in control. The whole nutrition narrative. I don't know how to get off on that tangent, but the B12 thing was Herbert's one that spread all the good news about B12 in animal foods.
Yeah.
Juicy's the one who discovered it at Merck Pharmaceutical Company.
Oh,
So
really?
I'm not in the B12 world. Put it that way.
Yeah. It's always struck me as kind of there's something off there,
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
You read so much about everything else, and then you get into the B12, which has become so controversial, and yet there's no studies there. Right? There's just a black hole, with a lot of opinions.
Yeah.
I just had an epiphany. I just had an epiphany when Colin was telling that story, and I realised now T. Colin Campbell, T stands for trouble.
Must be the Scottish blood.
It's the Scottish blood that's the trouble. Oh, it's too funny. Funny.
That's right. That's right. You're right on that one. I know my Scottish background 2 or 3 generations back, but I know what the traits are. So that's what we're doing, right, Barling? You're Scottish too.
Yes. Bill, I'm Scottish, 100% Scottish. Bill's Scottish as well. And Bill's name is William Wallace Tara. Can you believe that? William Wallace Tara. That's Bill's name.
Really?
Yeah, William Wallace Tara.
What's the second name again?
William Wallace Tara.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So what's next for T. Colin Campbell? Share with the world. What's T. Colin Campbell up to now?
Well, yeah, I'm writing another book, and I'm actually writing something, and this one, I really got to a point where, I don't have that much time left, and there's one story I really haven't told that I know I'm probably the only one in a position to tell this story because I've been there. Others, many others have somewhat similar things, but I've seen it from a very broad perspective. Going back to Bill's original question, why haven't we been able to advance this concept of nutrition, I guess you could say, in a faster way? And my take on that is the experiences I've seen in the profession going on behind the scenes. The methods that are used, the tricks that are used to do anything they can to destroy any movement towards the consumption of plant-based foods, especially any movement going toward the idea that's really the whole foods, because you can't sell the gosh darn thing. We can't get a patent on them. And so I'm telling that story. This is right at the heart of the thing that really represses our thinking. It represses fundamental thinking. That plus the idea that we've long worshipped animal protein as high quality. That's false. So I want to tell those two ideas, and then talk about evidence that I saw firsthand. I can't say right now because some of these things I'm putting names and names and places in this because I saw it firsthand. I got documentation. I already got a former federal judge who's now retired. He's going to look over what I'm saying to keep me. I don't want to get in more trouble like that. But
there'll be people shaking in their boots, Colin.
Well, someone, if they heard this podcast, I think that what they probably right now knows who they know who they are, but they've done things that I've seen firsthand, and I know how they did them.
Right.
Dishonest. They did them dishonestly, and they did not do them in the name of the public.
No.
They did them in the name of themselves. They're all self-serving. They got a good handsome, compensation for that. Sure. But I can't live with that. And I think to myself, and I was hesitating to write this because why do I want to, create so much more trouble? Maybe I'll get into some serious trouble like this. Should I name names? And I try to stay away from names when I can, but I can't tell this story. So I really wrestle hard with this and talk to people about it. But if I have some information that needs to be told, I know the public will all of a sudden see something that I have seen, and it has such a international effect, to be honest about it. Not just national, but international.
Well, I'm changing the T, Colin Campbell, from trouble to truth. Truth, better for the T than trouble. Truth, Colin Campbell, because you are the man of truth, and Bill and I are honoured in so many ways to be in your life as a friend, as a colleague, and it's so exciting because we will be together in the spring of 2024. Yippee!
Yeah, I know you guys enjoyed it a great deal, but I mean, as you can tell, the word all of us are like it, essentially, and that is, it's fun. To me, it's fun to be able to explore ideas. To run around, look in different ways, discover stuff, learning about stuff that may be wrong. And I always thought that was fun. Mm-hmm. And it was actually fun because in the academic community, before all these changes have now occurred, we could have opposite points of view. In fact, we looked for opportunities to have opposite points of view. We discussed it. And then go out and have a beer tonight, and after it's all done, it's crazy. Now you have to guard what you say.
Yeah,
I just find it so problematic.
It's dangerous.
Yeah, it is. Just all kinds of things can happen. So, but when I ask myself, should I refuse to say what I know just because of that? No, I can't.
I know you can't do that.
No.
Well, this new book coming is going to be another bestseller for you for sure. Can't wait. I know you don't have a title yet, but we're all very excited to get that out. And I'm sure you'll probably get a Netflix deal and you'll have your own movie.
Good enough. All right.
Well, Bill, have you anything else? I just want to thank Colin as
well. It's just been delightful talking to you as usual, Colin.
Well, thank you. And likewise, it goes both ways. I say I've always had an affinity for the backward body diet idea and so forth and so on. And they have had the cruise. Steady Pukelas have that in the cruise and so.
Yes.
So I feel like I'm very much a part of the community.
Well, you are. It's and a much bigger community than that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.